Welcome to the Velvet Myth. I'm your host, Adam, and I'm so grateful you've chosen to spend this quiet moment with me. As you settle in and begin to drift toward sleep, I hope this story arrives just as all the best things do. Softly, gently, and exactly when it's needed most. It was created with great care, and my sincerest wish is that it brings you comfort, calm, and restful sleep tonight. And if, by morning, you find yourself feeling a little lighter, a little more refreshed, I'd be delighted to hear from you. Knowing that you are here, sharing this moment with me, even through a few simple words, means more than I can say. But that's for tomorrow. Right now, there's nothing to do and nowhere to be. So let yourself settle. Let your shoulders drop. Unclench your jaw. Loosen your hands. And allow your whole body to feel the weight of the bed beneath you. Take one slow breath in and let it go. And one more, breathing in ease and releasing whatever the day left behind. You don't need to stay awake for any of this. Simply listen for as long as feels right and drift off the moment you're ready. There's no wrong way to do this. Now close your eyes and let the story begin. The last patron of the evening was a man named Gerald, who always borrowed the same 3 books and never quite finished any of them. Thea watched him button his coat with the slow deliberation of someone very nearly asleep already, tuck a volume of Georgian verse under his arm, and offer a soft good night that seemed addressed as much to the library as to her. She smiled, held the door, and felt the cold breath of the lane rush in before she pressed it gently shut behind him. The latch clicked. Thea turned the little sign from open to closed, and the library exhaled. She stood for a moment with her hand still resting on the door, listening. Outside, rain moved steadily against the arched windows. Not the urgent rain of storms, but the patient, unhurried kind that had apparently decided to stay the week. It tapped the glass in no particular rhythm, the way a thoughtful person taps a finger on a tabletop while reading, and the sound filled the whole building with a softness that Thea had never once found anywhere else in the world. She gathered the small stack of poetry collections left on the returns trolley. 6 volumes, some with cracked spines and one with a pressed violet, still flattened between pages 63 and 64, and carried them into the dim reaches of the back aisles. The brass reading lamps threw warm amber pools across the floor, leaving the upper shelves in pleasant shadow, and Thea moved through the light and dark of it with the ease of someone who had spent the better part of 30 years learning where every creak in the floorboards lived. "Back you go," she murmured, sliding a slender collection of Keats between its neighbours with the kind of care most people reserved for sleeping children. She said things like this often, small words of welcome and return. She was not embarrassed by the habit. She had simply long believed that books kept better when they knew they were noticed. Thunder rolled somewhere over the hills, low and unhurried, and the rain answered by pressing a little more firmly against the glass. Thea poured tea from the small brass flask she kept in her cardigan pocket into the flask's own lid, just enough for a careful sip, and stood beside the velvet armchair near the window to drink it. The tea was bergamot and something faintly smoky, and it warmed her all the way down to a place behind her sternum that had been quietly tired for some time. She shelved the remaining 5 books with the same murmured ceremony, working her way along the poetry section until she reached a tilting wooden case near the far wall, where several volumes had listed sideways, domino fashion, in the way books do when no one has tended them recently. She was straightening them, humming very softly, almost nothing, just breath and shape, when one slim volume slipped entirely from her fingers and disappeared behind the case with a papery whisper. Thea crouched. She nudged the bookcase to one side just enough and reached into the gap. Her fingertips found the book, but they also found something else. A narrow seam in the stone wall behind it, running from floor to shoulder height, perfectly straight and ever so faintly warm. She stayed very still. The rain kept reading against the glass. Thea did not move for a long moment. She simply knelt there with her hand pressed flat against the stone, feeling the warmth come through it, the way warmth comes through a wall when there is a fire burning on the other side. Patient and purposeful, as though it had been waiting for exactly this. She withdrew her hand, rose carefully to her feet, and slid the bookcase a little further. It moved more easily than old wood and stone had any right to, as if the building itself were cooperating. And there, revealed in the narrow space behind the tilted shelves, was a door. It was slim and plainly made, dark timber, worn smooth, with no handle that Thea could immediately see. She ran her fingers along its edge until they caught on something cold and small near the midpoint. A brass latch, barely visible beneath a skin of fine grey dust. She rubbed it with the hem of her cardigan, pressed it gently. The door opened inward with a sound like a slow breath. Not a creak, not a groan, but a genuine sigh, as though the room beyond had been holding its lungs for some time and was now, at last, able to let go. The air that came through was extraordinary. It smelled of lavender and rain and very old paper. 3 things that had no reason to be together and yet made complete and perfect sense. Thea stepped inside. The room was small and round, with low shelves built directly into the curved stone walls, following the arc all the way around, like ribs inside something living. A single reading table stood in the middle on a faded rug, and above it hung a brass lamp on a chain, its light already on, though Thea had not touched a switch. She could not see a switch. The books on the shelves were glowing. Not brightly, not in any alarming way, but softly and steadily, the way an ember glows at the bottom of a cooling grate. Each one pulsed at its own gentle rhythm, a slow brightening and dimming that was almost like breathing. Some were blue as winter dusk, some the deep amber of dried marigolds, some a quiet rose, some a pale and shimmering silver that reminded Thea of moonlight on still water. They did not hum exactly, but there was something in the air, just below hearing, that made the silence feel full rather than empty. Thea moved to the nearest shelf and leaned close. Tucked beneath the spine of one glowing volume was a small paper label, handwritten in cramped and careful ink. Unfinished, dreamer unknown, received autumn last year. She straightened. She looked at the others. Each one had a label. Each label carried some variation of the same words: unfinished, interrupted, not yet returned to. One read simply, waiting. With great gentleness, Thea reached out and touched a spine. Deep green, glowing like a lamp in a cottage window. The light inside it immediately brightened, steady and warm, and then, very gradually, settled again, as though it had felt her and was reassured. Something in Thea's chest settled too. She understood, in the way that certain truths arrive, quietly, without argument, as though they had always been true and she had simply not been standing in the right place to see them. That this was a room of safekeeping. That these books were not forgotten so much as they were being looked after. And that the library, patient as it always had been, had simply been waiting for her to come and do the same. The rustle was so faint, Thea almost missed it. She had been moving slowly along the shelves, reading the words pressed into the spines, half remembered, waiting, nearly there, when something shifted beneath the round reading table at the room's centre. A small sound, like breath caught and held, like something trying very hard to be invisible. Thea slowly knelt down, one hand resting on the edge of the table. Her green skirt spread across the floor as she leaned forward to look. Tucked between the table legs was a small fox, curled up tightly like a sleeping cat. Its entire body was made of soft blue light. Tiny stars drifting across its fur, slow and deliberate, like constellations reflected on still water. Its tail was wrapped around its nose, with the tip fading into a curl of pale, glowing smoke. Then its eyes opened and met Thea's. They were wide, amber, and filled with fear. Thea did not move. She did not gasp, or reach out, or say anything at all for a long moment. She simply looked, with the same quiet attention she gave to a damaged page, or a spine coming loose from its binding. Careful, unhurried, full of respect for something fragile. Then she sat down on the rug entirely, crossing her legs, making herself smaller. "Hello," she said, very softly. "I'm Thea. I look after this library." She paused. "I won't rush you." The fox, Pip, though Thea did not yet know that name, blinked once, slowly, and did not flee. That felt like a beginning. Thea unscrewed the cup from the top of her thermos flask and poured a small measure of tea into it, the steam rising in a lazy curl. She set it gently on the floor between them, close enough to reach, but not so close as to crowd. "I realize," she said, "that I have no idea whether dreams drink tea, but I've always found it helps, with most things." Pip's nose twitched. The fox uncurled, 1 degree at a time, until it was sitting upright with its ears pricked and its luminous tail wrapped neatly around its small paws. When it finally stepped out from beneath the table, it left tiny paw prints on the wooden floor, glowing faintly blue, fading within seconds, like the last light going out of an ember. "I don't know where I belong," Pip said at last. The voice was small and earnest, neither quite a child's nor quite an animal's, but somewhere gentle in between. Thea nodded. "Can you tell me how you came to be here?" Pip was quiet for a moment. "There was a child," the fox said carefully, as though choosing each word from somewhere tender. "In the village. They were very ill for a little while. We were in the middle of something, the dream and the child and I. And then they had to stop." Pip's ears dipped slightly. "They didn't mean to, I could tell. But they never came back, and I've been here since." Thea felt the words settle into her chest, soft and heavy as a quilt. "Then we'll find the book," she said simply. "Your book. It will be here somewhere. They all are." She looked around the glowing room, at the hundreds of quiet spines, and then back at Pip. "We'll find it together." Pip looked at her for a long moment, then, very carefully, leaned forward and sniffed the tea. The dream room had its own quiet logic, Thea discovered, and the sooner she stopped trying to impose her own, the better. The books were not arranged alphabetically, nor by date, nor by any system she had encountered in 40 years of librarianship. Instead, they seemed to follow something more like feeling. Clusters of warm amber spines gathered near the floor where the lamplight pooled lowest. Cooler blue whites ascending toward the ceiling in gradual gradations. Whole sections organized by what Thea could only describe as texture of longing. She traced a finger along one shelf and murmured to herself that whoever had catalogued this place deserved either enormous credit or a very long conversation. Pip had been sitting politely on the reading table, watching her. When Thea crouched to examine a lower shelf, and then straightened again, glancing upward at the higher rows with a small sigh, the fox seemed to understand. "May I?" Thea asked, and held out her forearm. Pip stepped onto it with surprising delicacy, 4 small paws finding their balance with the careful confidence of a cat that had decided, at last, to trust someone. Thea felt only the faintest warmth and a gentle pressure, like holding a lantern. She lifted Pip slowly toward the upper shelves. Together they looked. The spines up here were labelled not with names, but with fragments. The taste of cold water on a summer morning, a room with yellow curtains, the feeling of being almost tall enough. Thea read each one softly aloud, and Pip would tilt its small, luminous head and either give a polite blink or a brief, definitive shake. One book, when Thea's fingers brushed too close, opened of its own accord to reveal a seascape, a wide grey beach, and a diamond-shaped kite on a very long string. The string still taut, still pulling. The dream simply paused at the moment before the wind changed. The page smelled of brine and sunscreen. Pip looked at it with gentle interest, then looked away. Another opened to the warm confusion of a birthday party. Candles, the blur of voices, a slice of chocolate cake on a paper plate, and then closed again, as though suddenly shy. Thea breathed in the ghost of the icing before it faded. So many of them. she said quietly. Not sadly, exactly. More the way one says such a thing, standing in a very old churchyard, and meaning it as a kind of tenderness. Thea carried Pip down to where a lower shelf along the far wall bore a small, hand-written card tucked at the end. Village Children, Mosswick, current decade. The spines here were labelled in neat silver ink with first names only. Daisy, Tobias, Neve, Cressida, a small cluster of jacks. Thea read each one in a murmur, and Pip leaned forward with increasing attention, the constellations across its fur shifting slightly, the way stars do when the eye adjusts to the dark. Then Pip stopped. One book sat a little apart from the others, its glow dimmer than its neighbours, like a lamp that had been left on but was not quite sure anyone was still home. Pip stepped forward on Thea's arm, and Thea held very still. "Almost," Pip said. "Almost?" Thea kept her voice low. "The light feels near. Like when you think you've remembered something and then it's not quite there." Pip's tail curled and uncurled at the tip, but close. Thea shifted her weight, and as she did, the rain outside altered its rhythm. Lighter, steadier, more purposeful. A soft tap, tap, tapping that seemed to be pointing, quite deliberately, toward the left-hand corner of the room. Thea turned and looked, and began to walk. The corner shelf was lower than the others, tucked beneath a small arched alcove that Thea had not noticed before. The books here were slimmer, their spines narrower, their glows gentler, the particular softness of things that belong to people who are still becoming. Thea crouched down slowly, her knees offering their usual quiet protest, and ran her fingertips along the row until she felt it. A book bound in faded blue cloth, no thicker than a field journal. The colour had worn at the corners to something closer to grey, the way beloved things do when they have been handled and hoped over. Thea drew it out carefully and turned it to the light. A child's name was written across the cover in silver lettering, small, looping, the kind of handwriting that belongs to someone who has only recently learned to make letters and is still proud of each one. Thea did not say the name aloud. It felt private in the way that sleeping faces are private. She simply held it and understood. Pip made a sound Thea had not heard before. Not a word, something quieter than language. A small exhale of recognition, the sound a creature makes when it has been searching for a long time and has finally found the right door. Thea opened the book. The pages inside were luminous. The left-hand page showed the beginning of a woodland path beneath a full moon, silver light between dark trees, the suggestion of moss and cool air and something wonderful just ahead. On the path, clearly waiting, clearly hoping, stood the outline of a small blue fox, with its tail raised like a question. And at the edge of the page, half dissolved into the margin, was the faint impression of a lantern that had been left burning. Pip's fur blazed. The constellations drifting across its back quickened their slow turning, spinning faster, brighter, the way a sleeping child's eyes move when the dream finally takes hold. "Is this it?" Thea asked, though she already knew. "Yes," Pip said, very simply. "Yes." Thea read the fragment of text at the bottom of the page, written in the pale ink that seemed to be the language of this room. The dreamer grew warm in the night, and the fox waited at the lantern, and the path went on, but the dreamer did not come. Beneath it, a single unfinished sentence trailed away mid-word, like a voice interrupted by sleep. Thea felt the ache of it, clean and honest. She thought of a child lying fevered in the dark, a dream beginning and then slipping away, the little fox waiting patiently in the moonlit wood with nowhere to go. She set the book open on the reading table with the same care she had always given to fragile and important things. Then she looked at Pip. "Whenever you're ready," she said softly. "There's no hurry." Pip looked up at her. Those amber eyes held something Thea could only call gratitude, though it was larger and quieter than the word usually managed. The small fox pressed its nose once against Thea's hand, warm, briefly solid, impossibly real, and then stepped forward onto the open page. It happened the way snow settles. Pip's glowing form loosened at the edges first, then the whole small body dissolved in ribbons of blue light that drifted downward like breath in cold air, folding themselves gently into the waiting image. The outline of the fox on the moonlit path brightened, filled, became whole. The lantern steadied. The book closed itself with a sound like a single, satisfied sigh. And then it sat on the table, glowing steadily, the way a light glows in a window when someone inside knows you are coming home. Thea stood very still and let herself feel it. The boots arrived first, a slow, unlaced shuffle along the corridor. And then Mr. Aubrey himself appeared in the doorway of the dream room, with his umbrella tucked under one arm, still dripping quietly onto the floorboards, and an expression of mild and unsurprised satisfaction on his broad face. He looked at the glowing shelves. He looked at Thea. He looked at the shelves again. "Thought so," he said. Thea found she had nothing to add to that. Mr. Aubrey stepped inside with the careful gait of a man who had learned long ago not to rush toward anything worth seeing. He turned slowly, taking in the soft, luminous rows, the warm, breathing light that moved between the books like a tide going nowhere in particular. Then he nodded once, deeply, the way people nod when a very old feeling is finally confirmed. "Heard them humming," he said, settling his umbrella against the wall. "Rainy nights mostly. Thursdays. Sometimes a Wednesday if the storm came in from the north." He paused, looking fondly at a shelf near his elbow. "Told Margaret, my sister Margaret, not the other one. Told her I thought the library was thinking about something. She said I needed more sleep." He smiled at nothing in particular. She wasn't wrong, mind you. The story drifted pleasantly toward an ending it never quite reached. Thea lifted the blue dream book from the table where it had rested since Pip's return and carried it back to the children's section. The glow it gave off had quieted now to something steady and domestic, like a nightlight seen from a hallway. She slid it gently into place on the shelf, and the other books leaned almost imperceptibly toward it, the way a row of sleepy passengers shifts together on a train. Mr. Aubrey had, by this point, produced a slightly dented tin of ginger biscuits from somewhere inside his jacket. Thea poured the last of the tea. They sat together, Just outside the dream room door, on the floor because there were no chairs, and neither of them suggested finding any, with the tin between them and the rain filling the silence in the most agreeable possible way. Thea glanced once through the open door. The shelves glowed softly in rows, dozens of small lights breathing in their own time, patient and complete, and quietly waiting. A village of sleeping things. She thought she had never seen anything that looked so much like enough. Before she left for the evening, Thea reached through the doorway and turned the nearest lamp to its lowest setting. Not off, just low, welcoming. Then she left the hidden door open by exactly the width of a hand, just in case something small and lost came looking in the night and needed to know that it was safe to come inside. The rain agreed and kept on falling.